actually the government's aim is often at odds with what neurodivergent children need, because their aim is standardisation. And standardisation is the enemy of equity. Because equity is about giving different things to children in different ways, educating children in different ways, which neurodivergent children need. And standardisation is the opposite.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Big Home Ed Conversations. My name is Kelly Rigg. I'm a home ed mum of two, founder of Off-Roading Motherhood and a qualified mindset coach. I'm passionate about supporting parents and neurodivergent families, especially as they navigate the transition from mainstream schooling into home education. So today's subject is super close to my happy place in terms of what I love to talk about. I am here together, as always, with my co-host, Ashley Venerio. So she's a fellow home ed mum of three and a former primary teacher. We created the Big Home Ed Conversations podcast with what began as honest, heartfelt talks around her coffee table, the kids screaming around our ankles, and has grown now into a space where hundreds of listeners now tune in for real, unfiltered conversations about mindset, behaviour challenges, educational philosophies, and the often emotional journey of alternative education. So we cut through the noise and we focus on what really matters to home educating families, offering clarity, confidence, and hopefully some community in every episode.
Our guest today is Helen Daniel. She is an educator, author, and after getting her master's in autism studies, she focuses on neurosensory divergence. And you can see how this really sparked her passion for advocating for neurodivergent children, so they can all have an educational experience that is equitable and supportive of their sensory needs. She's incredible. We know her. We love her.
Our conversation with her today focuses on some areas which are very close to my heart, as well as obviously a neurodivergent parent with neurodivergent children. I have experienced an awful lot of the things that we'll be talking about today, and the prejudice and experience that families are having around this right now in the modern world we live in can be really hard to listen to. And I appreciate that there may be some really triggering elements to this conversation. Obviously, we have worked hard to try and offer you a compassionate view of the school system and the ways that changes that could be made within it that would actually really help young people to access it and enjoy their education in a way that actually feels really right for them, whilst obviously respecting the limitations that teachers and the kind of budgets and environments that they already have in place offer to the staff who are trying to facilitate that. We're absolutely going to be talking to you today about the concept of how you, as a home educating parent, obviously if you have chosen to pull your children from school and are trying to support them at home, how you can obviously try and ensure that you are providing as supportive and accessible an environment as you can for your children, understanding them and their needs and how they learn, but also having that ability to adapt and understand each other's kids, and when you go to environments or set up groups and things, how you can make sure that you are being as inclusive and aware as possible. Obviously, this subject is all around the concept of ableism in education and how ultimately it is not designed for those of us who operate outside the bounds of neurotypical or normal, however people like to try and put it. We like things to be different, and we like to keep our own interests at the heart of what we do. And I think it's so important to make sure that we are being really open to our children's opportunity to embrace that as much as possible through their learning. So get stuck in. This is a long one. Again, we're sorry. These conversations are just too good. Like, it's just going to have to just enjoy it. It is what it is. We hope that you really love it.
Enjoy it.
Have fun. I'm so excited to have you on, Helen. I think I nagged you like a year ago to come on this, so I'm really glad that we've managed to nail her down.
I'm really excited to be here, and obviously I love listening to your podcast.
Helen Daniel is a really good friend of mine. I've known her for probably several years now. I don't actually know how long we've known each other for quite a while, but she is also now published author of Neurosensory Divergence, Autistic Languages, which is very much all to do with kind of creating an amazing kind of equitable life for autistic children. So you can go and grab her book. So in all the usual places. It's well worth a good read. I've really enjoyed reading it myself. But we are talking to her today about this kind of concept of ableism within the education environment, specifically through the lens of neurodivergence. But ultimately, it will touch on some of the experiences that people have, all kinds of disabilities, but that's not our main focus today. So we do appreciate we're not going to necessarily touch on everything that might be relevant to you listening. We're going to do our best. But the thing that we really want to kind of explain to you guys is we're going through this series of changing perspectives and understanding how all the different things like ableism, ageism create prejudice and they create judgment. And actually, for a lot of us, we're really working on trying to not do that. But we obviously then don't want to create that in our own home ed environments as well. We want to raise compassionate children. We want to be compassionate ourselves too. So as I say, without no further ado, we are talking today about SEND and ableism in the education system. And I think we're just obviously having our brief chat before we came on to get ourselves straight. And we kind of found ourselves really circling around really kind of the issues we're having with the current curriculum, EHCPs, the structure and the way that schools have obviously started to be established with this kind of idea in mind that really anybody with a difference kind of just has to get on board and somehow conform to the system we've got. And obviously that is not working for most SEND children. And so obviously handing over to you for a moment, Helen, so I won't keep talking the whole time. I'm terrible at this. You were mentioning before about EHCPs being a bit of a problem right now and what's actually kind of happening.
I think that when we're talking about the education system, quite often people talk about the EHCPs as being there's far too many, there's, we're rising amounts of people needing EHCPs and children. And with EHCPs coming out in 2013, around the same time, 2014, there was a new curriculum, there were new targets brought in. And I don't think a lot of people are looking at how these targets actually hugely impacted neurodivergent children and SEND children, because they narrowed what we were looking at. They started to bring in more complex ideas around core subjects. So they moved the goalposts and they said, now children are going to learn their 12 times tables earlier. Now children are going to start studying Shakespeare earlier. Now children are going to start to, look at literacy concepts earlier and earlier. And for some children, it's narrowed it so that they can focus. For neurodivergent children, it's narrowed it so they fall outside. So we are having more children who need EHCPs because we've literally moved the goalposts in education. And it's highly problematic. And it's something we need to talk about. And obviously there's a new curriculum review coming up. And the government is talking about making it more varied, like bringing in music and drama and things. But actually the government's aim is often at odds with what neurodivergent children need, because their aim is standardisation. And standardisation is the enemy of equity. Because equity is about giving different things to children in different ways, educating children in different ways, which neurodivergent children need. And standardisation is the opposite.
Like when it comes with like neurodivergence as a SEND kind of requirement, obviously you've got young people who maybe kind of learn really visually, or they learn by moving, very tactile, kind of sensory based play, or they might want to be moving their bodies quite a lot. And I know that when I chose to home educate, this was one of the major factors for me. I did not realise my son was neurodivergent when we first started home educating, to be fully transparent. But I knew that the concept of making him stay in a school environment for 5 days a week and have that structure around him just wasn't going to work very well for him. I also, to be fair, he'd lost a lot of his young years to COVID. So he hadn't had all the fun of being outside, playing with friends and having that like connection with nature. And in a way I wanted to maintain some more of his freedom. I just wanted to give him some more time getting to be a kid. And I think that whilst we say that obviously these things are really, really detrimental for neurodivergent brains, that actually I think a lot of children would benefit from a way more varied and like more interestingly taught curriculum with way more play-based activities and opportunities to learn things themselves and to contribute their own individual behaviors and ideas to it, instead of it being kind of like, as you say, like, oh, they need to learn literacy way earlier. Do they though? Like, is that actually going to have a solid outcome benefit on how quickly they learn to read or what they're able to go and do in future life? Like, is that really making any difference, or is this just a way to get them to sit down and focus a little bit more. Like,
and they brought in, so I used to work in early years and primary as a teacher, and they brought in table activities, and then they brought in sitting and writing earlier. And actually, if you look at the research and you look at different, like Reggio Emilia and different types of education pedagogy and things, there are some amazing ways that we can educate children. If you look at the early years, the way we used to do it, where children were, investigative and like learning about the world around them and finding what works for them and is enjoyable. But the problem you have is the government wants to measure. They want to measure a criteria so that they can compare children. And that the two things cannot marry. What neurodivergent children need, and I think I said this before, there is not a huge amount of research on what works for neurodivergent children. And as you say, obviously I talk about sensory a lot because sensory systems, we don't go into it deeply enough. And children who need to learn visually, who need a less speech-based education, are not being served by our current education system. But in the early years, it isn't as much like that. They are investigating. And actually, as you said, it could be really helpful for lots of different children who need to move their body more, who need a less speech-based, investigative kind of education, who need to learn through their interests. And
we're way more aware as well of, like, people obviously talk a lot about kind of the rising diagnoses and all the rest of it, and worrying about more children being diagnosed, etc. And obviously, whilst there's the fact that obviously we didn't have the right criteria in place, we didn't really know what we were looking for, we're now becoming more aware of what we need to be looking for and supporting children better. We're also moving towards the kind of concept that I think I read somewhere that by 2030 they reckon that 1 in 3 children would be considered autistic. And it's like, that means that actually a large majority of our community is neurodivergent, meaning actually, are they divergent at all? Or are we just all very different? And we kind of just need to start accepting that people are different to each other and we're not all the same, and we can't standardize them because it doesn't work that way. And the more kind of social model we move to, where we are just slightly more accepting that if someone's quiet, they don't really like going to social things and they find these places really loud, that actually we don't force them to go as a grown-up. Like, I wouldn't drag my husband's father, for example, who doesn't like talking to people, along to some event and insist that he sits and have a conversation with them. Like, you just don't do it. You allow people to be who they are, but we don't give the same grace to children. We don't really respect them. And I think we're definitely going to cover this to some degree in some of the ageism side of things as well, that we just kind of expect them to be to just put up with whatever us adults decide is relevant. And it's very weird when you think about it. It's really strange. I don't know why we're not interested in hearing what they have to say and actually respecting their boundaries.
Yeah, and my tutor at university, Luke Bearden, stated that he was saying that we get education the wrong way around for lots of neurodivergent children. So the way that they go into college and university and can study what they want to study and can learn in a way that works for them. So you can do more open book based learning, do, more vocational learning. And yet we don't offer that earlier on in ways that could really work for all different types of brains. I think learning through interests for all children would be amazing. And actually, because we have the internet, because we have video learning, because we have all these resources that we didn't have before, it is possible. So where the government is saying we can't give a different academic experience for every child, actually we can,
Yeah, that's the thing. The school itself could become more of a container, and we're seeing this. There are lots of different alternate provisions that are cropping up, and I know the government are getting antsy about them because people are loving them and they're using them. But ultimately, there are a lot of alternative provisions cropping up that do provide a more play-based or nature-based or like project-led or eclectic, and allow the children to kind of lead their own education. I think they basically provide facilitators, so adults who are around the children have their own space where they learn. So it's like their desk and their space that they can come and utilize if they need it, but they can collaborate. They've got libraries, they've got computer banks, they've got places they can go and explore, they can bring stuff in, they can like go off on field trips, they can do all kinds of cool stuff that basically furthers whatever project they are working towards. And the facilitators are there simply to help guide them and to, I guess, encourage them to continue to be productive. It's allowing them to kind of follow the natural progression of their education. And so much of our home education journey has been obviously understanding that my children are neurodivergent, recognizing that they need to learn very differently to how necessarily I was offering it, offering loads of creative opportunities, trusting them that they are actually incredibly intellectually capable, and are very, very capable of pushing their own education forward when it matters to them. And I say this with a grin on my face, because obviously we do still have our struggles around some subjects, of course, that are societally expected, and to some degree I am not educated enough to argue with that. So I'm just I still feel like we need to learn maths, kids. I can't argue with the fact that this is probably necessary. So it's not that they don't like numbers, but just that they need to have it presented in a really fun way. And I mean, I set up a maths obstacle challenge on our table the other day, where they had to match the coins to the price on the products that I'd put there, and they had all the timers out. But we don't often do this. I mean, I know that teachers do their best within the realms of what they've got. And again, this is not teacher bashing. This is 100% system bashing. It's recognizing that the agenda of the school system, and again, we have talked about this before, we'll bash on about it forever, but the goal was never individual greatness. The goal was educate the masses with as minimal resources as we can get away with putting into it, because it's expensive when you do it that way, to allow them to become reasonably competent in literacy and mathematics and basic understanding of the world of science, so that they could go off and do industrial jobs and further the economy of the country. The goal was not to create innovators. It was not to create individuals. They believed that the rich were doing that, and that was fine. The rich could do that all on their own, and they didn't need our help. But actually, we're seeing more and more individuals, especially neurodivergent individuals, running their own businesses, coming up with their own ideas, writing books, content creators. An awful lot of them are neurodivergent. And I think ultimately that does mean that we just have a real mismatch with what is expected in the national curriculum and in a school environment versus how we actually need to operate as individuals. And if we're allowed that time to hyper-focus and explore our own ideas, then actually we thrive. And we feel very self-fulfilled in our lives. We don't actually need an awful lot of other people fulfilling us. We actually can be quite self-sufficient in that way if we are able to be free and choose our own destiny to some degree.
If you think about the national curriculum, the way it was designed and researched, it's designed and researched based on non-neurodivergent children and non-SEND children. So all the targets, so motor targets, handwriting targets, they're not based on children where their motor skills develop along a different timeline.
No.
So even inference targets for autistic children always gets me, because autistic children quite often don't think one thing and say another. They say what they mean. So inference is the skill of knowing about thinking one thing and saying another, and being able to decipher that in texts. Well, an autistic child, it's just well, I don't even know what it is. What is it? And for lots, the targets don't consider the fact that there are children that learn so differently, that develop so differently. And when we were talking about ageism, and the fact that we think, well, we can't possibly believe this as a society, that children all fit the same developmental milestones at the same age. It's not possible. And as an ex-teacher, the differentiation that we're able to put in does not meet the needs of a cohort of 30 children, nowhere near. And so in home ed, that's what's so lovely as well, is the fact that we've been in environments where there are older children and younger children all together. That's beautiful. It's really wonderful, because in the moments where, say, a child needs those younger children to be able to connect with, they have them, and in the moments when they need the older children, they have those to connect with. So that's something we don't see in schools.
No, there's a lot of othering, isn't there? I can remember feeling very segregated within my year group. Even out in the playground, you didn't play with children of different ages. You didn't go and integrate with them very much. And if anything, you may be more scared of them, or didn't really know much about them. And it is quite upsetting, actually, when you think about that, because I also think my youngest, for example, who's now 6, if you ask her who her friends are, and she does struggle with this anyway to some degree, because she doesn't tend to really decide that people are friends very easily. But she will actually list most of my friends as her friends, so adults. There are people in her environment who she is very attached to and sees them as friends. Like, she enjoys making them a birthday card, and she wants to tell them that she loves them, and she wants to play with them and spend time interacting with them. Because they're around adults who encourage them to just be themselves all the time. They feel very safe. And I don't think that a lot of children feel that way. I suspect an awful lot of them don't get an awful lot of autonomy at all, really, in their lives in terms of what they wear and where they go and when and what they're actually working towards or trying to achieve. And I think this obviously becomes a problem in schools when you're then the goal really is for a teacher when you've got 30 children. I can only imagine how disruptive it becomes when you have got goals and things that you have got to try and achieve, and you have got to try and get this curriculum taught because that's what you've been told you've got to do. And you have got children in that class who are not regulated, who are struggling to access it, who are therefore getting bored or frustrated or distracted, moving around the classroom, possibly getting upset or angry. Like, you do see, obviously, teachers and parents, if you look at the comment threads of certain posts and stuff. I saw one the other day where a lady had shared about a petition that's going around about asking for all children to be allowed to go to the toilet whenever they need to go to the toilet. I can't even believe we need a petition for this. But the comments on it from teachers were how to say that you're not a teacher without saying you're not a teacher. Like, obviously we can't have all the kids going to use the toilet whenever they want. And it's like, how on earth are we supposed to get a class taught if they're all just wandering off every 5 seconds? And it's just like, but is that truly what would happen? Or if you actually offer respect and grace to someone, like, yes, to some degree, okay, but this is actually more of a cultural issue in terms of children do not feel respected to make decisions about their own bodies. They are young adults who have got so much potential and are stuck being told, no, you need to focus on this, no, you need to focus on this. And actually, but I'm really interested in this, or I want to go and learn how to do that, or I could be a really great hairdresser, but everyone's telling me that that's a rubbish career and I shouldn't do that. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do, and I don't know how to express myself. And so, of course, they push back. Of course, they cause, like, ruckuses in these situations because they're bored and they're restless and they want to be able to be independent and make their own choices.
It falls kind of into the whole idea of, like, there are a lot of practical changes that can be made in schools that offer obviously more respect towards the children that are being educated, but it eventually would lend to meeting all the different needs of the children. So not just those that are neurodivergent, but everyone in the school, that there are a lot of needs being depressed that aren't necessarily related. And I think this is probably a whole other topic, but when we look at it from the topic of today, I think schools misunderstand a lot, and there are these changes that can be made.
So one thing that I wanted to go back to about going to the toilet and teachers saying, oh, well, they're going out to the toilet and they're there for ages. Or, isn't it interesting that children would prefer to be in the toilet than in your lesson?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, there are children going out to regulate. They're spending time in the toilet because they just need downtime. That's a bit of research and information right there. And so if you're having to bring in rules, and I think this happens often in the education system, rules are brought in around behaviour that is challenging for the adults. Instead of getting curious, which it goes to what we were about to talk about, getting curious, what is happening for these children? What is going on that's making them? And because I think when you talk about teachers and parents, the difficult thing about talking about who is right and who is wrong, or who, that the teachers need to accommodate, which of course they do. I think when you're in the system, it's so ingrained in you. You've gone through the system as a child.
Yeah.
You're then teaching within the system. You don't know. You haven't stepped out of that system.
Yeah.
You're still working in it. So you're like, well, we have to teach children maths, and this is the way because this is the national curriculum. And although as teachers, quite often we have this, like, especially as a neurodivergent teacher, undiagnosed, you have this formal response to education and the system, because you're like, this feels wrong, but I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah.
And actually, my training in my master's on autism, and like a neuroaffirming course, was the eye-opener to me to go, oh, like the problem, I was sitting in the problem. And the teachers that are in there don't know how much they're sitting in the problem, and they can't change it, because how do you change government directives that are coming down to you as a single teacher?
And that's where, like, we get angry with teachers striking, or we get angry with them pushing back or whatever, and like, but actually I mean, I was saying this for a little while now, is this, like, home educators will spend an awful lot of energy campaigning against bills that eradicate children's rights, that like this children's wellbeing bill, for example, which absolutely has not got wellbeing at its core at all. It's like a band-aid. They're desperately trying to cover up the fact that actually they have created a horror show of experience for most families, and that it's not dealing with the core problems. And again, it's like behaviors versus triggers, and looking at the root causes of things. That is not going to solve the problem. We know this. It absolutely will not. And that ultimately you are dealing with a situation where you've got parents who are really unhappy with what their children are experiencing in schools. They are seeing them really miserable. They are seeing them not okay with what they're being taught. They're even saying to the kid, look, I know it's boring. We just have to do it. Like, we just need to tick the box. And it's like, I know you don't want to sit your GCSEs, but in a school, they won't allow them to sit the functional maths GCSE, which has the same equitable value in terms of UCAS points for getting into university. Unless they failed their maths GCSE twice, then they can try the functional one. And it's just like, why? Why is this not kind of being offered as just an option? Like, if you are not loving the more academic form of maths, then let's do the functional one, and let's get you a qualification so that it's just done, and we don't have to keep stressing you out about it. There is not a child on this planet who, after failing maths twice, is going to want to go and try and do a maths a different way. They are going to want to run fast away from education, and when they're given an opportunity to run, they will run, and they will never trust it in the same way as they could have done. And we don't want this. We don't want young people running away from education at the first opportunity. We want them to want to lean into it. And you don't get buy-in like that by forcing it. You don't get buy-in like that by making it as boring as possible, and like forcing them to do it from as young as possible. Like, you get it from showing them that it's relevant and interesting and like fun. And I really wish we'd start to understand this a bit more, that education is not supposed to be dry. It's not supposed to be boring. It's supposed to be incredible and interesting.
What I would love to see, should I say this on a podcast? I'd love to see what I was doing in school. I think it's easier in primary school. I don't know if it's so easy in secondary, but almost having those small moments of teacher rebellion. Once you know you sit in this system, like, bring in, and it isn't even rebellion, it's equity. So like we were saying, bring in noise cancelling headphones and have those in the classroom for anybody to use whenever they want. Have aids, and talk to your head teacher about the fact that there are children in my classroom who take in more sensory information, and therefore the school bell is really quite traumatizing for them. What can we do about that? So teachers have power. They don't feel like they have power. I had small acts of rebellion. Like, one child in my class needed to hold on to my knee the whole way through a session. And I was like, if that's what you need, I'm okay with that, because that's what you need. And again, like, thinking, getting really curious. And we don't have huge amounts of time for getting really curious as teachers, which is so sad. Because that's really what you need to do. But you do have some time to do it. And the time that you do have, getting really curious about the cohort of children that's in your classroom, thinking about what is their sensory experience, so a teacher said to me, I've got a child who just isn't engaging with the lessons. They aren't engaging with anything that we're doing. And I said, give them a video. And she's like, but that's not, like, the other children won't have a video. Give them a video with subtitles and see. Just do one lesson and see what they access. Similar, the same subject, but give them that with headphones. And they accessed it. And I'm not saying that's right for every child, but that sensory accessibility, if a child has taken in learning through their visual sense, not primarily through their auditory sense, for whatever reason, or they don't memorize spoken words because of the way they've accessed language, if they're echolalic, like you were talking about, they're repeating speech, then their communication has been accessed differently. And therefore, like you said, they seek out communication partners with adults, because adults are safe communication partners who will alter their way of being to meet that child's communication needs. If
Yeah.
a child needs to speak to an adult instead of another child in partner work, notice that. You know, there's so many things we can learn through curiosity.
Little tweaks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think little tweaks are enough, obviously, but they are a start. They are the beginning.
Yeah. And I think just give the kid a little bit of hope too, right? Because I mean, if you feel like, I know I had teachers who were more flexible, who did allow us to get up and move around a bit more, who let us sit wherever we want, who would let us sit with our friends, and like all of these different moments when you think like these are things which you maybe get told like, oh no, don't let them sit with their friends, they'll talk the whole time, or like don't do this, whatever. It's like, but are they learning nothing from talking to each other? It's like the whole concept of like fining people for taking holidays during the term time. It's like, actually, are they learning nothing from travel? Like, or are they learning nothing from going to a family funeral and actually being a part of a massive social occasion like that? Or even helping with a house move? Or do you know what I mean? Like all of these different things, like there is so much learning happening in the day-to-day life that children actually get separated from. It's a whole other conversation. But like we've got an awful lot of young people here who are going into a system that was not designed for them, with parents saying, please listen to me, I actually do know my child and I've got lots of information for you. And the school being like, there's only so much we can work with this. I mean, but ultimately, if we make it boring, if we're not offering enough opportunity for different types of learning, and like I think I mentioned on a podcast about a year or two ago that my son was doing like breakdancing in the kitchen whilst I was chucking maths questions at him, and he was able to answer them immediately. And as an experiment, I got him to come and sit down and asked him similar questions, and he couldn't answer them. And so in motion, he could access it, but still his whole body was vibrating with a need to move, and he couldn't focus past the feeling of needing to move. And it's like, this is fascinating.
Like that movement that's needed that we don't offer in conventional education as much, and we're reducing. And actually, it's been proven that movement helps cognition. So it's, it doesn't make any sense that we're not doing it. And talking about like how we make things harder and harder for a lot of children, then demands become unsafe because as we make it harder and harder and we're putting demands on their body and their brains that feel uncomfortable, well, worse than uncomfortable, like painful, sensory demands, academic demands, their brain goes, that's not safe. This demand is not safe. It doesn't feel safe for my body. And then all demands become unsafe, because how do I know? If a teacher is like, oh, that's not that loud, you can cope with that, or it's not that smelly in here, or you can eat that food, or whatever, or parents are like that, then that's where we get children who they have a trauma response to demands. And if we want children to feel safer around those things, again, it comes down to get curious about where they're at and what they actually need, which we can't do in a standardized system.
No. And I think it's interesting because even just reflecting on what you're saying then, I'm going to be brutally honest, like I have moments, and I have done over the years, I'm obviously gradually getting better and better at it, but like there are moments when I'm just like, okay, I hear you, I know that it's loud, but like we just need to get through this, like it's not long, like I hear you, but can we stop? Like you screaming about it is not going to help, like it's just going to make it even worse. Or like I was literally talking to somebody the other day about the compromises we make between having two children, for example. I've got one that is just like, leave me at home, I just want to be home, I just want to play at home, please don't invite anybody over because it massively dysregulates me and I will withdraw to my bedroom and not play with them. And I've got one who really needs to be out and moving and seeing people and super social, and gets very isolated very quickly, very bored, and will become quite distressed if he is home too much. And so where people kind of talk about compromise and like trying to meet needs, and like this is the same just in our household, let alone like a classroom. I can't imagine if I'm trying to do maths questions with my youngest, my eldest will answer because he has a need to just state the answer immediately. And once we figured out that that was just an impulse control issue, we were able to re-divert it, and I got him to write it on a piece of paper to show me privately instead, and we got around it. But you have got to constantly adapt and notice and observe and look for the triggers and try and understand why they're starting to behave this way. But the point is that it is so complicated. And I think this is one thing that we did want to kind of talk about in terms of the home ed environment. So like we've talked a lot about schools and the tricky stuff that kids are experiencing in schools, but actually we can quite easily end up accidentally replicating ableist behavior at home we can accidentally create ableist groups and environments that aren't very aware of neurodivergent needs. We can equally create neurodivergent groups that, as we discussed very briefly before, actually, this needs to almost stop being a thing. What we need to do is create neurodivergent groups that are probably going to be for the louder, more exuberant end of the spectrum versus the I need quiet and safety kind of end of the spectrum. Like I've got two children both on opposite ends of that spectrum, which is hilarious fun. And so I do have to do some things that are for the one that's bonkers and one that's for the kid who wants to be quiet, aka be at home. Like there is no groups for that one. But it's trying to understand that actually you can try settings, you can go to settings, but not all home ed settings are going to feel accessible to you and your children.
Yeah, so I think that we were talking about intention, and the intention behind some home ed settings that are set up is we are going to work towards being inclusive and equitable to the cohort in front of us. And when you go into those settings, you feel that. You feel welcomed, and they're like, right, how can we make this work? And what can we do to assist? And what can we... And there are other home ed settings that are set up with the intention, I have a particular cohort in my mind. They're either louder, or they are more talkative, or they are outdoorsy, or they have that cohort in their mind. And therefore, when you go into those settings as a home ed mother, father, parent, carer, you might feel, well, this doesn't fit. And there's a feeling that, oh, well, it should fit. Like they should try and make my child fit, or it's hurtful if your child doesn't fit. But I was saying, I think we're going to have to accept that there has to be different types of home ed settings because standardization doesn't work. You can't have one setting that works for all children, but you can have an intention as a person who runs it to try and be as equitable as possible so that if it can work, it will work, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I mean, we run a co-op on a Friday morning, and I have always had the intention for it to be inclusive. But initially, we definitely found that the setting is actually, it reverberates, the sound isn't always great in there, so the acoustics isn't fun. And for those of us with sensory issues around sound, actually it can be quite unpleasant, especially if there's a lot of children playing, and we had to kind of instigate sections of time. So like we've had to have the rule of noisy play has to go outside. No one can think if it's inside. And that we've had to definitely work on stages of the session, so like structuring it a little bit so the kids had some boundaries and some understanding of like, this is what's expected in this little window of time. Also for the parents' perspective, like we want everyone to feel like they matter. That is very important to me. And so obviously as a neurodivergent person with neurodivergent kids, it's obviously easier for me to provide that because I'm aware and have learned over the years to be so tolerant of and not get annoyed with behaviours.
And I think Ashley was saying before about, you said it's not just a school thing where, it's the complexity of not being, of standardization versus equity is so difficult as well in the home ed community.
Exactly. It's so funny because when we started talking about this and I was reading about your background and everything that you're doing in this space, I was looking at it very much through this lens of education in the traditional sense and thinking about how, gosh, it's so lovely to have the flexibility of home education because we really can cater, but it's, as we had the conversation, it's actually really hard to cater to all the different needs. And so you are going to have this element of trial and error to see which spaces work for you. And it's not neurodivergent specific either. I mean, I think there are children's needs that you still have to accommodate. And it's hard, like you were saying, standardization makes that impossible. It's just not possible. And so I can look back, over my school and say there were plenty of things that I had to do that I didn't want to do, plenty of situations I had to endure that didn't feel comfortable just because you have a rude teacher or you have someone that's got to work through something because that's what the state demands of it. and teachers that are teaching to testing. And so it's just always going to be the case. And I think the more aware we can be, and actually I wanted to ask you, it not just for parents of neurodivergent children that are listening to this, but for all parents, is there advice that you would share, or just even, wisdom to impart on us to say, having this open mindset, just being aware? Because I think that's part of this series that Kelly and I are doing now, is just trying to challenge everyone to think critically about stuff that we've just sort of accepted.
Yeah.
Because like you were mentioning with the teachers, we haven't left that world, right? We're still in it. So I would love to hear.
So I really, obviously my passion is around understanding sensory profiles. And I do think that a huge part of the work that we can do as parents is to understand our child's sensory profile. How are they accessing the world around them? How are they accessing the learning? How have they access communication? How are they interacting with the environment? Because unless we know that, we can't know what setting's going to work for them. And you can't until you're in that situation with them and seeing, okay, they're not able to, we don't talk enough about the fact that, they're not able to access the lesson in the way that other children are. They're not able to access reading in the way other children are. When you know that, then you can sort of configure life in a way that works for them. When you're a home educator, when you're in the schooling system, it's incredibly difficult. And this is why I find it so hard to work one-to-one with parents often, because I'm like, well, they need to not be in school, really. Or alternatively, we need to all come together to instigate change, which is what we see a lot of the campaigns happening now. A lot of the conversations are around there needs to be systemic change. But until that happens, having that, this is my key bit of support, I would say. Having a deep understanding of your child's way of being in the world and what it could look like if you had the gold standard for them, knowing that, writing it down. They might not have it right now, but if you know what the gold standard is for them, then that can be in your brain as, right, this is what I'm working towards. And then also communicating that to anybody that is working with them, anybody who is around them, to get curious about that. That's what I would say.
And I think this is one, like you just touched on it, home educators work quite hard politically to push for the rights of young people, because although we have decided to opt out of the school system in a lot of ways, we do care an awful lot about young people in schools and the experience they're having. It's why we talk about it. It's why we care so much about it. And that truthfully, if we were to rally all of the parents of the UK to start pushing back and signing petitions and actually saying, no, it's not okay that you find me if I want to spend time with my children. No, it's not okay that you force them in even when they're really miserable. No, it's not okay that you're telling me that they're going to fail at life because I can't get them into your school, but your school isn't willing to actually accommodate and adapt to support my child. No, it's not okay that the funding that you are receiving for a school, like schools receive, like I think it's £8,000 a year towards that child's education, which is not a huge amount really in the grand scheme of things, but most of that is going on overheads. Not anywhere near enough of it is going towards actually contributing to that child's education. If a home educator was able to claim even half of that to be able to support their SEND child at home and provide them with an accommodation-rich environment with all of the resources and occupational therapy and everything they need, they could go on to be absolutely incredible young people, really, really confident in themselves and capable, and that money will be really well spent. But we don't see parents fighting this battle enough, partly because they're exhausted and they're busy and they're working long hours and they're just about trying to get through the day, and the hustle culture is so real that most people haven't even got the headspace to be thinking about this. They're angry about it, but they haven't got time to do anything about it. And I think this is something which I do feel quite passionate about. The more of us who care and start to push back on it, the government will have to make some changes. But that's where I guess the HCPs and more people applying for them and more people pushing back and shouting about what they're unhappy about, and then also then removing their children from school and deciding to home educate them, is getting the government's attention. It is making them realise that parents are not happy, and SEN is one of the number one reasons for people taking their children out of school, because they can see that it's just not going to work. That doesn't matter how hard they fight. I've known parents who have fought tooth and nail to get the EHCP, to get the person put in place for them to have the one-to-one, and there's been a child in the room who has got more severe needs, and that TA has been moved to take care of them, and their child is coming home every day saying, with them saying, have you had your one-to-one time today? And they're like, no, they sat with them all day. And it's just like, this is unbelievable. And the parents got no recourse. There's no way for them to force the issue. The school like say, oh, no, he's definitely getting his one-to-one time. It's like, he's not though, is he? Like, you're just lying to me. And ultimately
I do think that when we talk about this, we talk about it on a systemic basis, because there will be so many teachers in the system who have their hands tied, who want to instigate change. So I actually think that, and head teachers and people within the system, and if the training was there, it's a massive systemic change that we need. It's a changing government ideology. It's a complete, like when we talk about tinkering around the edges of education, I just think, well, it's not going to work. That's not going to work. Because we're doing that at the moment. We're talking about putting buildings in the playgrounds of schools to assist SEND. That's not going to do it. So tinkering around the edges of education, it needs to be such a forceful change in narrative,
change of attitude. And socially, I feel like we're getting there. Like socially, I do feel like people are starting to be more aware. Not everybody, no, but more and more people are talking about it. More and more people are trying to be accepting of it, and it's going to hopefully have a trickle-down effect.
We've had a kind of parenting revolution as well, where we that went through that system, we're no longer perpetuating that. So that's a huge shift.
It is.
That
huge.
we are. So when we talk about demand avoidance and the fact that we're not allowing our children to go into school, and there's emotional based school avoidance, actually that's parents going, I'm not going to push my child back in to this system that hurt me, that I know is problematic, and
is now hurting them,
hurting them. So with this parenting revolution, we're not going up against, it feels so LA local authorities and like teachers and head teachers, it feels like we're going up against them as parents, but actually we're all being damaged by the system. There's so many people who go into those industries to help, but they are forced into this system. So it's like when you talk about patriarchy, it hurts everybody. The system hurts everybody.
It does. And I think every time we do feel the confidence to stand up for ourselves or for our children, or we advocate for their needs, or we manage to get an accommodation for them, or we manage to get them into a special provision or whatever, like every time we are able to fight for them that bit and show, like, to help educate the teachers there, or to whatever, right, every single one of these steps, it feels really hard and slow progress, but it does make a difference. And even if the decision is, I've had enough, I'm pulling them out, I can't even deal with this anymore, that is a massive stop sign up to the government. It's saying, absolutely not, I'm not happy with this. And it's not to say that this is the rebellion, we should all go on strike and just every parent should just pull their SEN kid out of school and be like, that's enough, off with you. Obviously that's not going to work, because a lot of people can't rely on it and need this to be a safe space for their children, and it needs to change. But it definitely does, it's making them pay attention. It is like they are concerned that so many people are pulling their children out of school.
Well, we've seen change in the workspace. So hopefully that will eventually bleed into the educational system.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier. We were talking about the fact that there are closed captions, there are subtitles, there are different ways of doing work, like not having to go into the workplace for some people, working from home. We can see that human beings need these sorts of things, and children are human beings. So, we need to be instigating these changes across society, really.
We need to start seeing more and more those of us who are kind of obviously in the world of neurodivergence. We see it, we accommodate, we notice, we're working constantly to adapt and understand our children, our friends' children, to provide safe environments for them to go and interact and enjoy. those of you listening who would consider yourself neurotypical or do not believe that your family life is necessarily touched by neurodivergence, is to just, again, recognizing that where your children maybe are able to achieve things by a certain age, or I don't know, for example, going to an environment where you see a child who is behaving in a way that your child has been raised to behave differently. Language matters, awareness of neurodivergence matters, because we do obviously have children getting dysregulated. They might be having a massive meltdown in public.
Well, I think it talks too about like physical needs versus like that we can see, like if someone has a physical need, like they are in a wheelchair or they're blind and they're walking around with a guide dog or a swinging, I don't know the proper name for it, but the stick to make sure they don't hit anything. We make an effort, right? It's very easy to say, okay, I'm going to get out of that person's way, or I am not going to pet the guide dog because it clearly says not to. And I am not going to, or I might open the door for the person in a wheelchair, right? Like we can see that and do that. But there is this, I don't want to call it ignorance, but there is this lack of appreciation for the non-visual needs that people have. And so it's just, I think taking the opportunity, like you were saying, there's these opportunities to talk about the differences of families and the different needs that people have, and being able to then take that as an opportunity to tell your child about that and to talk about it, because it can be talked about. We want to build that awareness. We want to build that empathy. We want to build that respect for the differences we all have. And I think that it's just, instead of maybe saying, oh yeah, that's what they do and we don't do that, you can build it more, right? Like you were saying. And
I do think that so my theory of neurosensory divergence really helps with this, because when you talk about the sensory system and taking in more sensory information or more varied sensory information, then you can see that creates a physical difference in the brain, that it builds more connectivity in the brain and it's busier. If you have a busier brain and your sensory system is filled up, then think of those as cups and they can overflow much more easily. And so that's a really good way to explain to parents, to explain to their non-neurodivergent children, look, this is actually it's a physical thing that's happening for this child.
Yeah.
It's not.
I explained this to my kids the other day. I managed to come up with an analogy of, like you have a sensor when you walk into a room, it turns the light on. And I said, and if you think that some people have a sensor that when you walk into the room, it turns the light on. For some people, the sensor would be as soon as somebody enters the house, it turns the light on. Or maybe it's on the blink and it's basically just saying it's on all the time because it's really aware that there could be something moving, like a fly flies through the room, and that is enough to set the sensor off. I think, Ashley, you've been literally dealing with this situation at home anyway, haven't you, with a random sensor that's been doing something with your house?
We have a ghost light.
Like, oh, my Lord. But it's like literally that I explained it to them in this concept that because I was getting really overstimulated, and I said to them both, I need you guys to understand something. I said, right now, Mummy has got about 20 different sensors going, alert, 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 something is wrong, like fix it. And you guys are talking to me and I've asked you to stop, and I'm recognizing that I am feeling uncomfortable, like I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, or I'm feeling a bit touched out, or I need a bit of quiet time, or whatever it might be. And you are actively crossing that boundary right now. And you might have needs that are doing this too, and yours are all going off as well. And I'm very conscious of the fact that you have got lots of alerts going off, that you also need things from me right now. And this is chaos. This leads to like, and I was like, oh, it's a massive great bomb's going to go off in a minute. Like, calm down. Yeah, everyone needs to take a breath. Like,
and that's unplug. You need to unplug. Basically, that's what needs to happen. I always say, if you're going towards a meltdown, if you can unplug the child from sensory input, that can help. If you can't, you're just going to have to sit through it, because it's like a computer system. Like, when it overloads, you can't stop that. And once it's got to that point, so you sit through it and you're there for them and you oversee it. But if you can manage to, before you get to that point, you're unplugging sensory. Yeah, you're turning off those alerts as best you can before it gets to that point. And like you said, I need you to stop speaking just for a second.
Yeah, just for a second. Like, I just need a second. It's so hard, isn't it? And I think it's like trying to get them to understand. And we did the whole thing on like sensory and like how many different senses we've all got. And there's so much we could talk about around this. There's so much more we could say. This has been a really amazing conversation. These conversations never run short, but thank you so much, Helen, for being with us today. And we'll absolutely have you on again at some point. We'll talk about some more of the sensory stuff in more depth and how we can teach that to our children, because I think that's really fascinating. But thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. Loved it.
Thank you.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Big Home Ed Conversations podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Big Home Ed Podcast for updates. We'll be back again next week for another episode, but don't forget to send us your questions, comments, and personal experiences on the topics we'll be covering this season. Visit our blog, linked in the show notes, for a reminder of the topics, or just message us directly on Instagram and TikTok. Take care.